messaging is a living, breathing creature, and that just when you think you've got it under control, it gets away from you, and the market gets away from you. You really have to go back to your messaging and refresh it on a regular basis, or at least test it on a regular basis.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Entrepreneurship 101 lecture on marketing communications with Mark Evans. We've got a great crowd out tonight, so I just want to thank you for braving the polar vortex that we're experiencing. I hope you all had your skiing gear on and toques and hats and scarves and all that was necessary. We play the Upstart video again because we're coming up on the deadline for the Upstart competition, which is January 31st. Before I get started, I just wanted to welcome our webcast groups that are watching around Ontario, NORCAT and Sudbury, Innovation Factory in Hamilton, and Haltech in Halton. We're happy that you can join us tonight. And back to the Upstart competition. So as I said, the deadline is January 31st, 2014. We're pretty excited, and we've been working pretty hard as a team to really up the prize. So we've been doing this for a number of years, probably 8 years, and we've always had the prize at $10,000. So I'm pretty excited to announce that it is $15,000 cash prize, and we have a number of in-kind services and prizes, including $5,000 worth of services from Gilbert's LLP, a legal firm, a $5,000 prize for an exclusive message delivery workshop from Hill and Knowlton. The Mars Collaboration Center, which you are actually in right now, so the area that does organizes all our space and conferences, they are offering $2,500 worth of space rental and AV setup support. And we also have a prize coming from the Mars Market Intelligence team. The Market Intelligence team offers free market research to our clients, but they have special services that they're developing that the winner will get access to. And it consists of a set of market briefs, which are 1 to 3 page reports that meet the most common business planning needs of startup companies. So basically, they will give you some additional information to really help you build your business plan, and that will be, valuable and tailored information to your startup. So that's also a valuable prize. So it's a pretty exciting year. If you're on the fence about applying, I definitely recommend you just have to submit an executive summary. It's a couple pages. We recommend that you apply. A lot of companies are really early stage, and this might be the push that you need to really work with an advisor and have a deadline for a pitch competition. It'll really force you to work as hard as you can and get everything in order, and you'll be really surprised by how far you come in such a short time. So January 31st, it's a little bit more than a week away, and definitely apply if you're interested. It is a fun day. If you're not applying, or we definitely encourage you to come out. We'll have a reception and lots of pitches, and it's a pretty fun sort of end-of-year networking event. Another announcement I have today is that we have tomorrow a Mars Best Practices session from 12 p.m. to about 1:30 with our entrepreneur in residence, John Warren. If you've been to workshops, you might have met John Warren. He's one of our facilitators, and he's speaking on business model analytics, how to manage and guide your lean startup. So we have had a lot of questions in this space, so this is a great resource if you want to come to the event or watch the video later. John will be taking the participants through practical and accessible methods for creating the right metrics, provide the context and use for each, and ultimately help to drive the venture's key strategic decisions. So if you're a little bit confused by this lean startup, how do I use metrics to sort of make decisions in my business, definitely recommend that you come to that. It is $15 early bird price, $20 regular price. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight. Mark Evans is the principal of ME Consulting. He helps startups and entrepreneurs tell better stories, which you will hear him tell stories, and you'll understand that how good he is at what he does. As the principal of ME Consulting, he provides strategic and tactical services to do messaging, brand positioning, strategy, and content. He's an active member of the startup community and works with a lot of startups. He's worked with startups such as Planet Eye, B5 Media, and Sysomos. He worked for 10 years as a technology reporter for National Post, the Globe and Mail, and Bloomberg. And you can follow him and his thoughts on technology and startups at marsevans.ca/blog. Not only does he have the blog, he also has a very popular weekly startup newsletter that talks about, curates a lot of great content in the space, but also links to other resources and events and happenings in the space. He's also one of the founders of MESH, Canada's leading digital conference, which is probably coming up again in May. And so if he doesn't sound busy enough, he is a very busy father as well with 3 kids. So welcome, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Carrie, and thank you for coming. I understand, with the weather and everything, it's probably a lot nicer to go home and have a nice glass of wine than listen to me talk for an hour. We're going to talk about messaging, and we're going to talk about the importance of messaging, the challenge that many startups and entrepreneurs face when it comes to messaging, and then look at the actual process by which you can go through the whole messaging process and come out the other end with hopefully a very clear and well-articulated idea of who you are and why people should care. So let's start off with set the stage here. Oh, before you get started, if you're on Twitter, the hashtag is #ENT101, right? And my Twitter handle is @MarkEvans. So let's start off with a quote from Zig Ziglar, who's a very popular motivational speaker and salesman. You can have everything in life you want if you will just help other people get what they want. And I think this is very appropriate when it comes to startups because we're talking about companies that are struggling to and scrambling to find the spotlight and trying to get traction and trying to get people to pay attention to what they're doing. And often one of the biggest challenges is that they are talking about what they do and not what customers want. And we'll talk about that slightly different look at the lens as we go through the different process. So I want you to think about 3 questions. And you can write out the answers if you want, because I think this will set the stage in terms of your thinking now and perhaps give you some food for thought as you come out the other end of this presentation. And the 3 questions are, what do you do? So if you have a startup or you're an entrepreneur, so what do you do? What's your product, right? Very simple. We do this. How are you unique or different? So think about that. And then why should I care? And I being the customer. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what you do or what you tell people what you do. All that matters is what the customer thinks of you. So if you have a startup and you want to sort of write those ideas down right away, and if not, you can just keep them in mind and think about what your ideas might have been now and what your ideas might be in 45 minutes from now. Maybe they're different. Okay, so what is messaging? So messaging fundamentally lets companies effectively talk about their products and the key benefits to the right target audiences. Pretty simple, straightforward proposition. It's amazing how many startups fail this test because they fail to effectively talk about what they do. Many startups get lost in the industry vernacular. They lose focus in terms of what they're trying to do and who they're trying to serve. And at the end of the day, they fail because no one really understands what their purpose is or their mission. And they don't identify their target audiences. And the other way to think of messaging is what I call core messaging. And I often refer to it as this because it really is at the core of what you do from a sales and marketing perspective. Without messaging and well-articulated statements about who you are and what you do, everything else you do from a sales and marketing perspective is going to fail because you won't be clear about who you're serving and what they need. And so when you think about messaging and you think about the role that it plays, think about it being at the engine of your sales and marketing machine. It really drives everything. And without a core, you have nothing. And so it's really important to think about that in terms of the importance it plays and the value it plays. So what is messaging and why is messaging important? So it answers the so what question. You come to a lot of startups and they're very excited about what they do, and I'm sure their products are really interesting, but it leaves the potential customer going, so what? Like, I don't, so what? There are dozens and dozens of startups probably doing exactly the same thing as you, and you're going to get bypassed in a very short period of time unless you effectively answer the so what question. So why should I care? So what do I get? Number 2 is it highlights your unique qualities. And everybody is different in some way, shape, or form. Every startup has some way that they can position themselves as being slightly different from all the other startups battling for the same type of customers in the same types of markets. And some of those differences are huge, and some of them are very, very nuanced. But it's the ability to come up with those unique characteristics and try to find a way that makes you different from everybody else that'll play a key part in how you develop your messaging. And the other thing is differentiation. So, one of the things that is really great about startups is they tend to operate in silos or isolation. They think that they're the only ones with this great idea. And the reality is there's dozens and dozens of other startup entrepreneurs doing exactly the same thing, and they're just as enthusiastic, and they work just as hard, and their technology is just as good. So how do you differentiate amid that competitive landscape? And finally, it positions you in the marketplace. It gives you a place where you can call your own. Now, it may be a very small piece of real estate, especially if you're in a competitive marketplace, but it's yours. One thing before we go on, if you have questions as we go along, feel free. If you want to wait till the end, that's great too, and I'll stick around afterwards. So if you're the shy type, you can ask me then as well. So the other thing about, as we talked about, is that core messaging sets the tables for marketing. So once you have core messaging, then you can start to layer on all those other pieces that drive your marketing and sales. So it's your website, your videos, your one-pagers, your social media, your presentations, your speaking appearances, your sales sheets, all that sales and marketing collateral that you need to develop. And what messaging gives you, and we'll talk about, is consistency. It allows you to talk to different types of customers and different stakeholders in the same way with the same type of story, the same narrative. And without core messaging, you can't do everything else. So it really sets this table for you to do all those other things. And when I work with clients, a lot of them want to start, my website is really bad, or I'm not getting enough media coverage, or the competition has a higher profile than I do. And I always and they want to fix their website, or they want a slick video, and I always take them back to messaging, because this is where it all begins. You know, you can't put the cart before the horse, and you can't put a new website, unless you know what your message is and what your story is. And perception is reality. I wrote a blog post about this. When it comes to startups, one of the big things is perception. It's this idea that you're bigger, or you're shinier, or you're smarter, or you're faster, or you're more agile than everybody else. And that may not in fact be true. You may be slower, and your technology may not be as good, and your prices may be not as reasonable, but one of the things about messaging is you can create this perception. So let's talk about why messaging is so challenging. And you know, I spent more than 10 years as a reporter, and it was amazing that I ran into so many companies, and they would do an introduction through their PR company, and then they'd do the little pitch, and then I'd say, okay, listen, I've been around technology for a while, and I understand the vernacular, but I have no idea what you guys do. And they said, well, what do you mean? And it was industry jargon. It was all about platforms and solutions and best practices. And I said, well, tell me what you really do. And they thought about it for a few seconds, and then they'd say, well, we do this for this. And I go, well, that's your story. That's your message, right? And a lot of startups, I think, get caught up in trying to be too cute, too complex. There's too much inside baseball when they're talking about who they are and what they do. And as a result, they struggle with their messaging. And they fail to realize that simple messaging is the most clear and the most effective messaging. One thing, they have a lack of perspective, right? As a startup entrepreneur, you are 7/24. You're on the case, you're solving a problem, you're trying to build technology. You live in a very isolated world. I mean, if you can sort of peek up and look around, that's a really rare case. And it's the way that most startups have to operate. You have to be focused, and you have to be all in. But the problem is that you lose third-party perspective. The idea of people giving you external ideas and external feedback and criticism is not something that you have time for, and in many cases, it's not something you want to really hear. Because the last thing you want to get from somebody is, well, your idea sucks, or you're really on the wrong path, because you're so convinced that you're doing the right thing. And so that lack of perspective is a real killer when it comes to creating really strong messaging. Second is that many startups have an ego problem. It's really all about me, really being all about them. So it's all about what they do and the products they serve and the technology they're building and the smart people that they're hiring and the venture capital that they're raising. And this is what I call the Ron Burgundy syndrome, right? Is that every startup thinks they're superstars, or they're superstars in the making, or they're so much smarter or so much more agile or nimble than everybody else. And again, it's this ego problem is a huge hindrance when it comes to messaging, because messaging is not about you, the startup or the entrepreneur. It's about your customer and what they need. And finally, they're unclear about what they actually do. So going back to my earlier point about talking to these companies about what they do, is that it's confusing. It's that at the end of the day, and I've looked at dozens and dozens, hundreds of websites, and listened to lots and lots of companies pitch, and it's unbelievable about how you really can understand the problem that they're solving or the customers that they're serving. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of this in action. So this is Yummy Tummy. This is the website for Yummy Tummy, yummytummy.ca. Anybody have any clue what these guys do? This is the digital doorway, like your digital gateway for all those potential customers out there who you're trying to drive to your website. Anyone? They deliver food. Now, somebody's actually ordered from them probably, but maybe it was the menu. But there's no messaging here. There's no story, right? They're making you do the work. You've got to basically go, well, I'm going to have to check out the menu. And then they have a custom home delivery food service. Whoever guessed, pretty smart guess. But then again, it's like this is not messaging. This is bad messaging. Their website's probably going to go this much attention before you move on to the next site. Pixie. So Pixie is, believe it or not, they're a really hot startup. And anybody want to guess what these guys do? It's about photographs, right? But it's a discovery service. And I love the photographs. They're great. But their messaging, if you look, it's way, way on the top left in really, really small print. So they're really not helping you tell their story. They're not really telling you why you would care. I mean, there's thousands of photo sites out there. But these guys, beautiful, but will they have enough interest to get you deeper into the site? I don't know. Probably not. Another problem is spotlight on features, not benefits. Again, we're talking about company-centric versus customer-centric. So companies love talking about features. How many times have you gone to a website or read a brochure and it's all about the technical specs or the different features that a startup has? And people don't buy features, they buy benefits. So what you have to think about is answering that question, what's in it for me? What are the benefits for the user, potential customer, as opposed to what your product has under the hood? They don't care, really. Customers really don't care what your technology is, what it's built on, how it works. They care about whether it does the job for you. So let's talk about the approach to messaging. And think about, this is more from a sort of philosophical approach, more than anything else, more than mechanics. We'll talk about mechanics. So make the customer king. Now, I've talked about a lot about being customer-centric and talking to the customer's needs, and I'll emphasize this again and again and again because this is one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of startups make is they just don't value the customer. They want the customer. They pretend that they're actually marketing and selling to the customer. They're really not talking to the customer, talking about what the customer's needs are. What are their points of pain? What are their problems? How do you make the customer look like a hero? How do you make the buyer get a promotion or get a raise? All those things that are important to the customer, you should be talking about. And you should be putting the customer on a pedestal, a real pedestal, and serving them however you can. And messaging is a great way to serve them. Putting yourself in the other person's shoes, sort of a related thing, right? So get out of your little cocoon, right? Get into the real world and find out what the customer's thinking. Who is that customer? How do they behave? How do they buy? How do they consume information? What's the buying thought process in terms of you versus some other company versus some other company? So you've really got to get out of your own world and get into their world and think and breathe and live like they breathe. And it may mean actually talking to real people outside your company. And collect ideas from everybody. So when you are developing your messaging, it's not just the people that you work with. It could be people that you know, it could be colleagues, could be people at other companies. Any ideas can come from all kinds of places. And Marcus Sheridan, people familiar with Marcus Sheridan? So Marcus Sheridan is a really, one of the leading content marketing consultants out there, I guess. And what he says, and this is his approach to blog posts, so if you are a company and you have a blog that you want, and you're saying, I can't think of ideas for my blog, he says, get all your employees into a room, and have them come up with every single question that a customer may ask. And then you'll have 100 blog posts that you can power through for the entire year. And the same thing goes for messaging. When you're creating your messaging, it's everybody involved in the company, your advisors, your investors, your mentors, anybody who can come to the table and give you ideas and brainstorm and start to come up with those different ways that you can tell your story, the things that make you different, the things that make you unique, the things that make you stand out from the competition. It could be the receptionist, it could be your accountant, it could be the CFO. It's from anybody, because everybody's got a different perspective, right? They come out at it from a different viewpoint. The tech people will think in one way, the marketing people will think in another, the sales guys will think another way. And so ideas can come from everywhere. So you want to harvest those ideas and collect them. And be open to new ideas. One of the big problems when it comes to companies of any size is that when they get presented with new ideas, a new way of thinking, things that go against the grain, there's instant rejection. That's not the way we're doing things. That's not where we're going. That's not our vision. That's not our technology. That's definitely not where our product's going. That's not our roadmap. And one of the challenges is that they reject a lot of really great ideas. And so as a startup entrepreneur who's got a passion, who's got a vision, who's really committed to a path, is that you have to give yourself the opportunity to consider another way of thinking. And even if you eventually end up rejecting the idea, the goal is that you've actually get some kind of value out of it. Is that you say, well, that's interesting, but it only serves to enhance your own thoughts, your own attitudes. Or it could change the way that you think, change your approach to how your startup's going and the way that you want the business to run. So be open to new opportunities and new ideas. And get unbiased perspective. So again, we're going back to this whole idea of operating in a silo. And you can get perspective by doing it internally, by bringing lots of people to the table, people who aren't involved in the day-to-day operations of the company or who aren't as married to your idea as you are. So it could be family members, it could be friends, it could be people that you work with, it could be competitors or different types of people in different industries, suppliers, and it could be somebody external. You may want to hire somebody to give you that external perspective. They don't work for you. They don't work with you. They're just another person who can come in and give you a perspective that you may not have. And that's often when I work with clients is the biggest value that I bring to the table is a different way of thinking. Because I'm not married to their idea, and I have no vested interest in their failure or their success. What I am interested in is helping them figure out who they are and offering third-party perspective. And at the end of the day, it's what they really need. It's probably the most value that I bring. Is that they just hear from somebody else who just has a different view of the world. So let's talk about the messaging process in terms of how this actually happens, how we actually start. And it's not a very complicated process. It shouldn't be intimidating. You just have to go through the different steps. And eventually, things sort of evolve. And as I said, sometimes you need help, and sometimes you can do it yourself. But here's how you do it. OK, so it starts with discovery. So the first stage is really sitting down, and you could use a whiteboard, you could use a chalkboard, you could use giant pieces of paper. I use all of them. You could use technology, laptops, whatever you want to use. And you really sit down and you have to sort of ask yourself the fundamental questions about your business, everything about your business, from the beginning to where you're at, to where you want to go. And you have to come up with all these questions. You have to answer all these questions. So what you're looking for is really a brain dump of all the potential information, details about all the things that your business involves. And it's a pretty long process. And what you're doing is just trying to collect as much data as possible. And the kind of questions you have to ask yourself are things like, so what do you do? It's the biggest question you got to ask, right? And you got to be really clear. And so it's fundamental. That's where you start. So we make technology that allows people to share photos. OK, that's what you do. But that's where you start. And it's got to be crystal clear. All right? Second is, so what problems are you solving? So you're doing it for some reason. I mean, although there are startups that do it for vanity or they build something because they can build it. But at the end of the day, you're solving some kind of problem. You're trying to make someone's life easier, more productive, more efficient, more profitable, more entertaining, more engaging. Whatever that problem is you're solving, you gotta answer that. You gotta figure out what that is. Again, a very customer-centric view of the world. Who needs it? Who your target audience is. So a lot of products are actually built in isolation. So you come up with a good idea, you're going to solve a problem, but you're not exactly who you're solving it for. And that's what happens to many startups is they actually develop the product, they get all excited because they've got this product that does something, that has some kind of service, but there's no customers for it. There's no need for it. And so without demand, it doesn't matter if there's supply. And so you got to figure out, so who are those target audiences? Who are the people who potentially get value from our product and use it? And then finally, what's in it for me? Again, talking about that what's in it for me question. At the end of the day, is that people are going to look at your technology, they'll look at it at a glance, or they'll take a big deep dive, but they've got to figure out, okay, this product has value for me. There's some utility that's going to make my life easier, that's going to make me more profitable, that'll make me more productive. And it's fundamental questions. And you look at these, and they're pretty straightforward questions, and they're pretty simple, and you figure that every startup should have these ones nailed, but they don't. Maybe it's because they're excited about the opportunity, about the product, and building the product, as opposed to actually building a product that somebody actually wants to use. And the second step is market research. So after you've done discovery, and after you've got all the information about what you do and your competitors or potential competitors, and in terms of competition, we're talking direct competitors. So these are the people that you go head-to-head with, or these are the people that you indirectly compete against. So a good example would be online accounting. So if you're an online accounting startup, you're going head-to-head with QuickBooks, for example, or FreshBooks, or Wave Accounting, but you're also competing indirectly with Excel. So you got to think of competition from different angles and who you're actually going to be battling with in the marketplace. And so one of the most helpful tools is a SWOT analysis. So you're looking at strengths. So what's your company's strengths? What's going to make you unique? How are you different? Is your technology better? Is your UX better? Is your UI better? Is your customer service better? Is your messaging better? What are the opportunities in terms of, so where are problems not being solved right now? How can you solve problems more elegantly, more efficiently, cheaper, better, whatever those opportunities are? What are your weaknesses? So where could the competition outflank you? Where could those sort of the Achilles heels in your whole platform fall? Is it your pricing? Is it your design? Is it the way that you do account management? Is it your sales? And finally, threats in terms of what could kill you. So you've got your technology and you're rumbling along, and all of a sudden some other startup just cuts you off at the knees. So identifying and doing market research on all these variables is really important. So at the end of the presentation, there's a resource section with the link to how to do SWOT analysis. So it's a really good exercise, and I recommend that you go through it. And finally, you do a look at the competitive ecosystem. This is a client of mine, Kev Group, at the bottom here, and they do online accounting and payment systems for K-12 elementary schools. So it's a very niche market. So they're not competing directly against Intuit and Excel, but they are sort of in the same marketplace. So what I do when we do a competitive analysis is we're looking at it from a messaging point of view, not from a product point of view. So we're trying to figure out, how does the competition talk to their customers? How do they describe themselves? How do they identify their target audiences? So in this case, we're looking at the Kev Group. So they're integrated accounting and payment platform. Fraud prevention is huge for them, and clean audits. Okay, from a messaging point of view, that's really important to them. Other companies talk about amazing technology, amazing productivity, or better technology. Other companies talk about seamless integration. Other companies talk about financial management. Other companies talk about centralized tasks and processes. So what you're trying to do here is trying to figure out, so if we develop messaging, what we don't want to do is mimic or copycat other people in the marketplace. We don't want to look like and sound like somebody else. Because obviously there'll be no differentiation. What we want to do is figure out who we are, what our messaging is, what's important to our customers, and then position ourselves differently in the marketplace. So we look and sound and seem slightly different from every other competitor. And it doesn't have to be a major difference, it just has to be different. And it also gives you a sense at the same time about the competitive landscape from a product point of view. Who's real, who's not real, whose products are complicated, whose products are simple, who's expensive, who's cheap, that kind of thing. So you come out of this messaging exercise, and you should have a really, really good grasp of the competitive landscape and how you're positioned against them in lots of different areas. Talk to your customers. How many entrepreneurs in the crowd or startups in the crowd? How many people talk to your customers on a regular basis? Not that many. You're talking to your customers all the time, right? And you can talk to them in different ways. Like you can do surveys, you can do phone interviews, you can do webinars, you can do all kinds of things to talk to your customer, because the only way that you're going to find out how your product is going to resonate and the messaging that's going to connect with them is to talk to them. So I'm working with a company right now, RubiCloud, and they're looking at, they're a big data analytics company. And they're launching in March, but even before they sort of started building the technology, they talked to 20 customers, potential customers, and spent the time to really dig deep into what these customers wanted, what their points of pain were, what the opportunity was, and whether their idea had any legitimacy. And they came up the other end and said, yes, we've got a really great idea on our hands, and if we build the technology, then we've got a good shot at being successful. And even after the product gets developed, you got to keep talking to your customers or potential customers, because it is the way that you'll sort of massage your messaging, massage your product, massage your marketing, massage your sales. So if you go away from this presentation with anything of value, it's talk to your customers or your potential customers. Even if you don't have a startup right now or you're in the pre-planning mode, is your customers will tell you whether you've got a good idea or whether you're really just wasting your time. Target audiences. So again, once you talk to your potential customers, then you'll figure out who needs your product. And then you'll figure out, okay, there is a need here, but our customers are divided into different target audiences or personas. And the one thing that you should develop in terms of your messaging and your marketing is you may have, I'll give you an example. If you are selling a product to women between the ages of 25 to 34, startups say, well, that's our market, that's our target audience. But within those target audiences, there are different slices. So you've got women who are single, women who are married, women who are married with children, right? They have slightly different needs and slightly different desires. So your product can't be generic. Your messaging and your marketing can't be generic because they are different types of customers, right? So when you create personas, that's how you start to identify in granular detail how old they are, how they buy, what they look for, where they get their content, how many kids they have, what their education is, that whole degree of knowing your customer inside out. And there's an application called Persona App, PERSONAPP.com. And it's a really easy way, user-friendly way of creating personas. So target audiences, talking to your customers, target audiences, personas, the big three. Okay, so we've done our discovery/brain dump. And then we go into our research and we learn about the competitive landscape. We get a sense of how we're positioned in terms of the marketplace. And then we start to synthesize some of these ideas. So as you're doing this process, certain themes or topics will come up. Things that sort of strike you as, hey, yeah, that is different. That is something that we can build upon. And it could be a single word, or it could be phrases, or it could be the way that you start describing yourself. So what you do is you gather back together after sort of thinking about all this information and the competitive landscape and doing all your research. And then you sit down for a brainstorming session. And it could be around an idea, and it's mostly around a whiteboard. And you throw a bunch of stuff at the table, and you sit there for a couple hours, and you start to mull over some of the more interesting ideas that people have. And again, it comes from lots of different places. Somebody could say, well, I think that we could really, really drive on the fact that we're a more elegant solution, or we're more user-friendly, or we're obsessed with customer service. Those little phrases that start to sort of build your story, that's those little threads that you can start to build upon. And gradually, as you talk, you'll start to coalesce some of those better ideas. And I'll give you a couple of examples with clients of mine. So this is a company called Vigorate. They're a digital marketing agency. So we went through the discovery brainstorming session, and I went away and I did tons of research on all their competitors, and I sort of came to them with some general ideas, and they hated everything that I did, except for one word, and the word was performance. And so they took that word, and then we did a lot of brainstorming around performance. What does performance mean to them in terms of their different businesses? And one of the challenges with Vigorate, and it's a challenge for a lot of companies, is that you do a lot of different things. So some of you may have one product, and some of you may have multiple products, but you're trying to create this sort of messaging umbrella. And so for Vigorate, we came up with performance obsessed. So they do Facebook contests, they do mobile apps, they do Facebook apps, they do email marketing, and everything they do, the theme was performance obsessed. So once we had that idea about being performance obsessed, then we started building our messaging around that whole concept. And everything fell out of performance obsessed. So they're able to redo their website with the whole idea about performance. So it's all about performance, performance, performance. I mean, you look at the competitive landscape, the reason that performance resonated is that none of their competitors were talking about that. It was always about integrated solutions or one-stop shopping or digital, being digitally agnostic or something like that. But performance was the way that they could stand out. Another example is Horizon. So Horizon is a Mars client doing really, really well. And what they do is they provide sales training to on-the-floor salespeople. So if you go into a Best Buy and they're trying to get you to buy a particular product, then most likely is they may be either getting incentives or they may have received some really good sales training that rewards them for pushing a particular product. And that's what Horizon does. So they had a website when I started working with them, and their messaging was terrible because you really couldn't understand what they did. They were doing really well, but their website and their messaging was way off base. And so what we came up with was high performance sales training. So the idea was, again, is that you want your salespeople to be high performers. But at the same time, the platform is high performance. It's really accelerates your sales training and your sales processes. And so we just started building around that idea of high performance sales training platform. And then gradually a story emerged. And so the common theme is it doesn't take a lot of ideas or a lot of words to come up with your story. You just have to grab onto one that you really starts to resonate with you and you think that really captures the imagination of who you are and the customers that you're trying to serve and the product that you're developing. Be different, unique, or both. So we started off the presentation by being different and how powerful that is and the ability to be really unique. And again, when you're trying to position yourself being different in different ways. From a product perspective, you want to be different. So you can be different in terms of your pricing or your onboarding or your customer service or your sales process. You can be different in terms of your messaging and the story that you tell and how you tell it. And whether it's all about video or whether you got a great blog or whether you do kick-ass webinars, whatever it is, you're unique. So you look at a company like Moz, for example. Anybody know about Moz, Moz.com? So the search engine SEO specialist. So if they have these Friday whiteboarding sessions, so it's a 10-minute video that they do in front of a whiteboard, and you think, who watches a 10-minute video? But these videos are so good that you should watch the whole thing. And that's how they differentiate themselves and make themselves unique as a marketing, messaging type of company. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what we mean by that. Is 500pixels.com, 500px.com. Anybody use them, right? Local Toronto company. So basically they do photo sharing, like dozens and dozens of hundreds of companies. And so they were started in 2006 as a live journal blog, and eventually out of Ryerson, and eventually they sort of transitioned into being a blog. And then eventually they started, in 2009, they decided, well, we better get serious about this thing because we got lots and lots of users, but it's not really a business, it's not really an app. And so they decided to develop a service, a platform. But how do you develop a platform when there's already dozens of other platforms out there? There's PhotoBucket and there's Flickr and everybody else. And so what they decided to do was make this website the place for your best photography. Not all your photography, but your most beautiful shots. And really sort of said, don't put anything else on here. We only want beautiful pictures. And we're going to create a community that values beautiful pictures. And so what happened is they started to attract pro photographers who really wanted a place where they could showcase their photographs in a really beautiful location. They didn't want to be on Flickr anymore because Flickr was too busy, too noisy. Everybody else is on Flickr with their pictures of cats and their children and things like that. And so and so once they got the influencers and the pro photographers on board, they started talking about it. And then people who were enthusiasts and who like taking beautiful pictures started thinking, well, this could be a place for me too, because I take beautiful pictures. And then you get people like me who are, bad photographers with good cameras, taking pictures. And then once in a while, you know how it is when you hit the auto setting and you take a really good picture by mistake, and you look at it and you go, hey, it's a pretty good picture. So then you get people like me signing up and putting their pictures on. And what's great about what 500px does is that once you put a beautiful picture up, even if it's a mistake, people will start commenting on how beautiful your picture is. So you start feeling good about your pictures, and then you realize, oh, I'm not going to put my crappy stuff up here. I'm only going to put my good stuff up here. So, and what they've done is they've proved wildly successful. They've raised, I think they've done 2 rounds of venture capital. The service is now a marketplace, and they've done extremely well. And it's a classic example of a startup in a very competitive space, finding that unique brand positioning, and then creating some really very simple but very powerful messaging around that. Another example, and just a different type of example, is a Chicago-based startup called Park at My House. And as you can imagine, if you live in a big city and there's no place to park, is that they actually created a service where you could actually rent out your driveway or your garage. And so you can actually sort of, save money. You could do it all online. And so it's not a terribly unique idea, like parking. I mean, how many different ways are there to slice parking? But they came up with a really sort of way of doing it. Like parking at somebody's, that's a pretty cool idea, right? I don't know how well they're doing, but when I came across this website, I said, that's really interesting. I think, and they're different from everybody else who's trying all these parking apps to try to help you find a free parking app. So another way of actually carving out a unique position in the marketplace and having messaging to support that. Okay, so the other thing too to remember, and this is a combination of approach and process, is focus. And a lot of startups try to be all things to all people because the idea is that if we can get lots of people to purchase our product, then that will make us successful. And the problem is that they cast the net too wide. And that's why many startups talk about all their features and all their benefits, because they figure if they try to get lots of people's attention, some of them will actually purchase the product. And what it does is it just confuses you. And it distracts them in terms of what you really do. At the end of the day, they don't know what you do, and they don't know who you're serving. So the one thing when you think about when you're talking about messaging and product marketing for that matter is be focused. Be simple. Make it easy for people to really get their heads around what you do, the benefits, and why they would need you. So some examples of this are Evernote. People use Evernote. You should use Evernote. It's a great tool. So remember everything. Simple messaging, and then simple benefits, right? Really easy to understand. Now, even if you don't use Evernote, and now you see this, you go, well, you're probably hopefully saying, well, how does that work? Like, how do I remember everything? What's involved? And then you'll dig deeper, right? So the whole thing about your messaging is you're not trying to hit a home run with your messaging and with your marketing. What you're trying to do is hit a single. You're just trying to get people in the door so that they actually get what I call into the consideration funnel. Not the sales funnel, the consideration funnel. Is that they'll start to think, okay, well, I'll give you the time of day. I'll take that next click into your about section or the how it works section or the pricing section. And that's what good messaging does. Good messaging really starts people into your world. Really allows you to enter their universe. Another example is Nest. I wish I had invented Nest. I'd be $3.2 billion richer right now. But again, really simple story, beautiful narrative, beautiful design, right? Really easy to understand what they do. I mean, how sexy is thermostats in terms of the world, right? But their messaging and everything they did was beautiful. And I don't know if anybody's seen the video for Nest. It's a beautiful video. And if you are thinking about buying a thermostat, I don't know how many people get excited about thermostats. You might be so after that video. And finally, this is a neuroscience company. And their messaging, I really like their messaging. I mean, the brain is pretty interesting for lots of different reasons. But think faster, focus better, remember more. Really nice messaging, right? Punchy, to the point, memorable, captures your attention. And most likely, you might hit the get started button. Like, I think this would be a pretty good website in terms of a messaging perspective. It gets you down the sales funnel. And finally, when you do all that work, so you do all the thinking and the discovery and the research and the brainstorming, and you've got your messaging down and everything, you draw a line in the sand. So the thing about messaging is it's fluid, it's dynamic, it's ever-changing. So just when you think you've got it down, the market shifts on you. Or some new competitors emerge on the scene, and then you got to change things again. But that's okay, because messaging will change. My own messaging on my own website, if you went into the back end of WordPress, there's probably hundreds of revisions to my About section. You read it, you go, that's not so good anymore, right? At the time, it's great. So when you're writing your messaging, just do it, right? Draw a line in the sand and then live with it for a while. And a month later, 6 months later, a year later, it's going to be stale. And it's not going to reflect who you are, what you do, and where you're positioned in the marketplace. But that's okay, because if you don't start, you can't get going. And then your goals in terms of what you want to get out of messaging at the end of the day. So in terms of the mechanics of messaging, you start with your value propositions, and it's often known as unique value propositions. So this is what makes the unique benefits for the user. What makes you different from everybody else? How can customers get true value from your product or service? And it could be better customer service. It could be a more efficient way to process your photos. Whatever that is, those key benefits on, that goes into your value proposition bucket. And key benefits. So what do I get, right? What are the biggest benefits of using my service? So it could be robust analytics. It could be the ability to really have deeper relationships with your customers. It could be more granular insight into their activity. And then finally, your leading features. I said, don't talk about features. Well, don't talk about them first, but talk about your features. Don't talk about all your features, but talk about your best features, your most interesting features, the most relevant features. And keep in mind that as you break down your target audiences and your personas, the benefits and features are going to change. Like, not all your customers are going to love all your benefits or all your features. Some of them it's going to be a sort of a mashup, right? So just keep these things as your three sort of big messaging buckets. And then you'll come up with a positioning statement, which really sort of positions you in the marketplace. It's similar to your elevator pitch. We're a company that does this for these type of customers so they can do this. It's 3 parts. We do this for these customers so they can do this, whatever that. And then you got your boilerplate, which is really the About Us section of your website. So it tells your company story, who you are, what you do, who you serve, and where you came from. And those are the 3 sort of big content pieces. And then the 3 C's, when it really comes down to it, and this is where we started off, is that clarity in terms of messaging, coherency, and consistency. So 1, you're clear about who you are and what you do and who you serve and the value of your product and the point of pain that you're solving. You're very coherent in the way that you speak, so there's no misunderstanding about anything that you do, and that it's very easy for different target audiences and stakeholders to really understand the problem that you're solving and the market that you're going after. And then consistency, so that regardless if it's your CEO or your CFO or your devs or your customer service people or the person who takes care of your books, when they talk about your company, when they tell the company story, it's consistent. So your blog and your presentations and your speaking appearances and your one-pagers are consistent in the way that the tone, the voice, the message, the content, the design. And that's what messaging is all about, is really achieving the 3 C's. And then there's one more thing. There's always one more thing. And it's never stop tweaking, right? So as he's talked about, is that messaging is a living, breathing creature. And that just when you think you've got it under control, it gets away from you. And the market gets away from you. And your competitors do things that surprise you or do things that shock you, for that matter. And that you really have to go back to your messaging and refresh it on a regular basis, or at least test it on a regular basis. And make sure that it's valid, make sure that it's still vibrant, make sure that it's still relevant to your product and your target audiences. So that's the presentation. There's lots of different ways of getting hold of me. So my website, on top there, and Twitter. And if you're interested in a weekly collection of curated content, I write a weekly newsletter. You can read some of it, you can read all of it. Really, it's a bunch of different links for content about operations, marketing, finance. And then there's a Canadian section for all of you nationalists out there. And it's a Saturday morning read. So when you're drinking coffee, you can click on links that interest you, and hopefully it offers some value. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And as I said, I'll stick around later to answer any other questions you might have.